Hey, what's up everybody? If you're enjoying the video, please hit that subscribe button and give a thumbs up. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. It really helps support the channel and allows me to keep creating content for you guys.
My name is Mi-soo. I still remember the day I married Jin-ho, how the cherry blossoms danced around us as we took our vows, how his eyes sparkled with promises of forever. I had packed all my cherished clothes from my single life, each item holding memories of who I was before becoming someone's wife. The vintage dress I wore when Jin-ho first asked me out. The blue sweater my late mother knitted for my college graduation. The lucky red blouse I wore to every important interview. "You'll love living with my family," Jin-ho had assured me. "My mother is traditional but warm-hearted. She's excited to welcome you." The first week in their sprawling family home was pleasant enough. Jin-ho's mother, Mrs. Park, smiled constantly, though her eyes never seemed to match her lips. She'd watch me unpack my things, commenting on each item with thinly veiled judgment. "Such modern styles," she'd say, fingering the fabric of my favorite dress. "Very unique for a married woman." I dismissed the unease crawling up my spine. This was adjustment, nothing more. But on the seventh day I returned from grocery shopping to find my closet door ajar. Something felt wrong. The air smelled different, acrid like burned memories. "Jin-ho." I called out. No answer. Following the strange smell, I walked to the back garden. And there she was, Mrs. Park, standing over a metal barrel, orange flames licking up toward the sky. In her hands was my mother's hand-knitted sweater, the one irreplaceable item I'd brought from my old life. "What are you doing?" I gasped, dropping my shopping bags. Mrs. Park turned slowly, her face eerily calm in the firelight. "Helping you become a proper wife, Mi-soo. These clothes belong to a girl. You're a Park family woman now." The ashes of my clothes settled in the barrel like the dark realization in my stomach. I ran to Jin-ho that night, tears streaming down my face as I explained what his mother had done. "You must be mistaken," he said, his voice frustratingly calm. "Mother would never do something like that without good reason. Perhaps some of your clothes were damaged or inappropriate for a married woman." "Inappropriate? They were mine, Jin-ho. That sweater was the last thing my mother made before she died." He patted my hand condescendingly. "You're upset. You're probably confused about what really happened." That night marked the beginning of my slow erasure. Each day another piece of my former identity disappeared. My books were reorganized to the attic. My favorite coffee mug was mysteriously broken. My recipes were deemed too modern for the family's taste. One evening I overheard Mrs. Park speaking to Jin-ho in the study. "A wife must cut ties with her maiden life," she whispered urgently. "Your father's first wife clung to her past, and look how that turned out. Mi-soo has potential, but these sentimental attachments are dangerous." The burning was necessary, a purification. Jin-ho's voice was hesitant. "Mother, she was very upset about the sweater." "Weakness. Will you let her tears manipulate you? Remember your duty to this family. Your father indulged his first wife's sentimentality and she betrayed him. Would you risk the same humiliation?" I froze outside the door, my heart pounding. First wife. Jin-ho had never mentioned his father remarrying. Days later, when Jin-ho was at work, Mrs. Park summoned me to help prepare kimchi. As we worked side by side, her hands expertly cutting cabbage, she began speaking casually about family heirlooms. "Do you know why I burned those childish clothes, Mi-soo?" I remained silent, hands trembling slightly as I continued working. "A new bride carrying old attachments brings misfortune," she continued, not waiting for my response. "My husband's first wife, she kept a box of letters from an old lover. Sentimentality is a form of disloyalty." "My clothes weren't letters from a lover," I finally said. "They were just me." Mrs. Park smiled coldly. "That's precisely the problem. You no longer exists. There is only the daughter-in-law of the Park family now." That night, Jin-ho brought home a beautiful hanbok, traditional Korean formal wear. "Mother picked it out," he said proudly. "For family gatherings." I touched the expensive silk. "It's beautiful, but—" "No buts," he interrupted. "Mother went to great trouble. You should thank her properly." I wore the hanbok at the next family dinner. Mrs. Park beamed with approval as relatives commented on how traditional and proper I looked. No one seemed to notice how the high collar choked me, how the sleeves restricted my movements. "See how much better you look as a proper Park woman?" Mrs. Park whispered as she adjusted my collar, pulling it slightly tighter. "Those old clothes were holding you back." The control extended beyond my wardrobe. Mrs. Park began monitoring my phone calls, claiming it was to help screen unnecessary distractions. My childhood friend Soo-jin visited once, but Mrs. Park made the experience so uncomfortable, commenting on Soo-jin's unmarried status and modern ideas, that she never returned. "Friends from before marriage often don't understand a woman's new responsibilities," Mrs. Park explained afterward. "I'm protecting your reputation." Even Jin-ho began to change. The man who had once loved my independence now frowned at my smallest decisions. "Mother thinks we should postpone visiting your father," he said one evening. "Family tradition says the first year should be dedicated to your husband's family." "But it's my father's birthday," I protested. "Your priority is here now," he replied, his tone final. 3 months after the burning, I discovered I was pregnant. Rather than bringing joy, the news seemed to intensify Mrs. Park's campaign to erase my former self. "Now you'll truly understand the Park family bloodline responsibility," she said, placing a protective hand on my still flat stomach. "All remnants of your former family's influence must be purified." The next day I found my photo albums missing. When confronted, Mrs. Park feigned innocence. "Old photos can bring negative energy to an unborn child," she said. "I've put them somewhere safe until after the birth." Jin-ho sided with her. "Mother only wants what's best for our baby." Her own mother did the same for her. I was losing ground and identity with each passing day. The clothes burning had been just the beginning, a symbolic annihilation that was becoming increasingly literal. In my 6th month of pregnancy, Jin-ho's father returned from a business trip abroad. Mr. Park was quieter than his wife, with kind eyes that seemed to hold secrets. One afternoon he found me crying in the garden near the spot where my clothes had been burned. "My daughter-in-law," he said gently, "what troubles you?" Something in his tone broke my carefully constructed dam of composure. I told him everything: the burning, the control, the slow disappearance of myself. He listened silently, his face growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "There is something you should know," he said. "Come with me." He led me to a small storage room I'd never entered, unlocking it with a key he kept on his person. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, neatly labeled with women's names. "My mother did the same to Jin-ho's mother," he explained, his voice heavy with regret. "And her mother before her. It's a tradition in this family, burning the bride's past to ensure loyalty. But my wife, she took it further than most." He opened one box labeled Eun-hee. Inside were photos, letters, and a small diary. "Jin-ho's mother told you about my first wife, I assume? What she didn't tell you is that Eun-hee didn't betray me. She took her own life after my mother and wife systematically destroyed everything connecting her to her former self." My blood ran cold. "And Jin-ho knows this?" Mr. Park's silence was answer enough. "Why show me this now?" I asked. "Because history repeats. I see the same emptiness in your eyes that I saw in Eun-hee's." He pressed a small key into my palm. "This room is your proof. Use it as you need." That night I confronted Jin-ho with what I'd learned. His face paled then hardened. "Father shouldn't have shown you that room. Those boxes are family matters." "Family matters?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "Your father's first wife killed herself because of what your mother did to her." "That's not what happened," Jin-ho snapped. "Mother told me Eun-hee was unstable from the beginning. The burning is tradition. It helps new brides adjust." "Adjust? You mean submit? Erase themselves?" "You're being dramatic," Jin-ho said dismissively. "Mother burned those clothes for your own good. Look how well you've integrated into the family since then." "Integrated? I'm disappearing, Jin-ho. Just like Eun-hee did." The argument escalated until Mrs. Park herself appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. "I see my father-in-law has been telling tales," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "Unfortunate. I had hopes for you, Mi-soo." "Is it true?" I demanded. "Did you do the same to Eun-hee? Drive her to suicide?" Something flickered in Mrs. Park's eyes. Not guilt but annoyance, as if I'd mentioned a failed recipe rather than a woman's death. Eun-hee was weak. She couldn't adapt to her role. I had hoped you would be stronger. By burning my clothes? By erasing who I am. Mrs. Park stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Who you were. Past tense. The moment you married my son, your former self ceased to exist. The burning merely formalized what was already true. A terrible clarity washed over me. You're not just burning clothes. You're burning identities. Now you understand, she smiled, as if I'd finally grasped an important lesson. And now that you're carrying the next Park generation, your transformation must be complete. That night, I discovered the true horror of Mrs. Park's plans. While searching for my hidden photo albums, I found a journal in her desk, a meticulous record of her daughter-in-law training. It detailed not just her techniques with me but with Eun-hee before me. The clothes burning was just phase 1. Phase 2 involved isolation from former friends and family. Phase 3 was personality reconstruction. Most disturbing were her notes about my pregnancy. The child provides perfect leverage. Once born, the separation can be completed. Mi-soo's maternal rights can be gradually reduced if she continues to show resistance to Park family ways. They plan to take my baby. To use my child as the final chain in my captivity. When I confronted Jin-ho with the journal, he finally showed his true colors. Of course the child will be raised according to Park family traditions, he said coldly. That was always the understanding. Understanding? You never once mentioned this before we married. Some things are too fundamental to require discussion, he replied. Mother has successfully guided many family marriages. Her methods are proven. Her methods drove a woman to suicide. Jin-ho's face darkened. That's enough. You will respect my mother and our traditions. The burning was necessary. Look how you cling to your past even now. Mother was right about you all along. In that moment, looking at the stranger who was my husband, I realized the full extent of my captivity. The burning of my clothes hadn't been a singular event. It was the beginning of a systematic erasure of my entire being. That night, I waited until the house was silent. 5 months pregnant, I moved carefully through the darkened halls to Mr. Park's secret storage room. Using the key he'd given me, I slipped inside and located the box labeled Eun-hee. Inside, beneath her photos and letters, I found her suicide note. Not the one the family had shown authorities, but her real final words. They took everything until I became nothing. Don't let them burn away your soul like they burned away mine. With shaking hands, I gathered evidence from each box. Photos of burned possessions, journals documenting the systematic breaking of will, even financial records showing how the Park family had essentially bought and traded women for generations. Before dawn, I called the one person who might still help me, my father. In hushed tones, I explained everything, asking him to meet me 2 blocks away in an hour. As I packed a small bag, the door swung open. Mrs. Park stood there, Jin-ho right behind her. Going somewhere? She asked, her voice terrifyingly calm. Yes, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness. I'm leaving. Jin-ho stepped forward. You can't leave. You're carrying my child. Our child, I corrected. And I'm leaving precisely because I am carrying this baby. I won't let you do to our child what was done to you. Raise them in a cycle of control and erasure. Mrs. Park's face contorted with rage. After everything we've done for you, the family position, the status, the future security. At what cost? I challenged. My identity, my autonomy, my soul. I held up Eun-hee's suicide note. I know everything. About Eun-hee. About the others before me. The authorities will too if anything happens to me. For the first time I saw fear in Mrs. Park's eyes. You wouldn't bring shame to this family, Jin-ho said, but his voice wavered. The shame is already here, I replied. In what you've done. In what you've allowed to be done. I walked past them, bag in hand. Neither moved to stop me. Outside, the morning air felt like freedom. My father's car waited at the corner just as promised. As I approached, I allowed myself to believe escape was possible. 3 months later, I gave birth to a daughter, my beautiful free June. My father helped me settle in a small apartment across the city. I filed for divorce, using the evidence I'd gathered to secure full custody. The Park family didn't contest it. The threat of public exposure was too great. Mr. Park sent money monthly, though I never asked for it. Occasionally he would send a note asking about his granddaughter. Jin-ho never reached out. Thought it was over. Thought we were safe. Then on Jiun's first birthday, I returned home to find a small, elegantly wrapped package at my door. No card, no note. Inside was a beautiful traditional baby hanbok. And beneath it, barely visible, a small pile of gray ashes. As I stared at the ashes, unmistakably meant to remind me of my burned clothes, my phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. Tradition never dies, daughter-in-law. A Park child belongs to the Park family. Some bonds cannot be broken, only burned and reforged. I clutched June tighter, my heart racing. The flames that had consumed my clothes years ago had never truly been extinguished. They had merely been waiting, smoldering, ready to engulf not just my past but my daughter's future. In that moment I realized, some ashes never truly cool. Some fires are merely banking, gathering strength for the next burning.